real quick before we jump into today's episode, let's talk about something so many writers struggle with: structure. You're knee-deep in your first draft. You're lost and overwhelmed. You're second-guessing everything you write. If that sounds familiar, I have a free 3-act worksheet just for you. It won't hand you a formula to follow. It'll help you see the story you're already telling so you can stop guessing and get back to the page. Grab it free at nancypanuccio.com/act. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/act. Okay, let's get to today's episode. You have all the answers. You just have to trust yourself more and stop churning to all these off-the-shelf beat sheets and craft books and story blueprints to give you the answers. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has the story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Is there anything more confusing and frustrating than knowing you have a story worth telling and still feeling completely lost inside it, like you don't have the chops to tell it? I've worked with hundreds of first-time novelists and memoir writers over the years. I've worked with writers who are writing fantasy, paranormal romance, women's fiction, crime fiction, autobiographical fiction, historical fiction, fiction and nonfiction, both. And here's what I know. It doesn't matter what genre you're writing in. Every writer runs into the same handful of struggles. So today, I want to talk about what those struggles look like and what's really going on when writing a story feels so much harder than you thought it would. So let's get right to it. Number 1, having a powerful idea and knowing how to turn it into a story are two vastly different things. First-time writers almost never come to me short on material. They come in with a character or situation they can't stop thinking about, a premise they're obsessed with, a life experience they finally need to put on the page to make sense of what happened. I've never worked with a writer who didn't have a strong idea and powerful, dramatic material. Never. There's always something there, a strong main character, a relationship, a situation, an experience, something that has a hold on them. It's a rich story. It's powerful. It should be written. It should be published. But having something to say and knowing how to shape it into a story are two completely different skills. You can be a great writer. You can write beautiful sentences. You can have a strong story idea, but shaping it into a story is a different muscle altogether. You can feel the story inside you. You can know your characters inside and out. You can know what happened. You can even see whole scenes in your head and still not know how to shape all of it into a story that moves and builds and carries the emotion you feel inside when you're writing it. A story that carries a reader from start to finish. If that's where you are right now, I want you to hear this. You're not behind. You have what it takes to tell your story. You wouldn't have the urge to tell the story if you didn't have the capacity to write it. Learning how to shape your ideas into a compelling story is a skill, and It's a skill you can learn. Okay, number 2. Writers blame themselves far too quickly. Here's what I see over and over. You get into the draft and suddenly everything feels harder. You don't know what should happen next, or you're revising and you're moving scenes around, you're rewriting chapters, cutting things, adding things, and somehow the story still doesn't feel the way you imagined it would. And you think you're the only one who finds writing a book challenging. And because you can't see why it feels so hard, or you think it should be easier, you assume it's you. I'm not good at this. I don't have what it takes to write this. What made me think I could do this? Maybe I'm not a real writer. Maybe my idea just isn't good enough. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing. But here's what I know from working with first-time writers. You don't know what you don't know. If no one has ever taught you how to look at your draft and understand what's happening underneath it, how would you know what to look for? You wouldn't. You just know something isn't working. You're getting overwhelmed, and it's not living up to the story you envisioned. And when you can't see what's keeping the story from working, you don't know what to do differently. So you try things, you move scenes around, you rewrite, you add more. And when the story still isn't working, it becomes very easy to turn that frustration inward. But struggling with a story isn't evidence that you can't write the story. I've worked with writers who came to me with beautiful sentences, compelling characters, powerful relationship dynamics, fascinating situations, and stories that absolutely deserved to be told. The raw material was there. What they didn't have yet was the ability to see what the story needed, and that's very different from not having what it takes to write it. Every writer struggles with the same things you are to varying degrees. You have strengths that other writers don't. It's just so innate, you can't see it yourself. So the struggle is normal. That's part of the process of writing a book. Okay, number 3. Chasing certainty will not make writing easier. What do we do when we don't know what to do? We go looking for answers, and there are plenty of them. Podcasts, craft books, beat sheets, templates, outlining methods, story frameworks. One expert tells you to outline everything before you write a word. Another tells you to throw the outline out and discover the story as you go. Someone else gives you a list of beats you're supposed to hit and tells you exactly where they're supposed to happen. There's so much information, and so we overthink, and it gets so noisy, we drown out our own instincts. And eventually, you can know a little bit about all of this and still sit down with your draft and think, okay, but what do I do with my story? That's a big part of why I do this work the way I do it. I don't think writers need more disconnected information. I think they need to explore their story at every stage. They need to ask better questions to guide them through the story so it doesn't run away from them and get too big, too overwhelming. They need the story to make sense, to be unified and cohesive, so they have clarity about what they're writing. Now, some writers need an outline to start. They have the story loosely in their head and in their heart, and getting it down on paper gives them a sense of direction. Other writers discover their stories by writing. They need to get into scenes and follow their characters around before they can see where the story is going. I've worked with both. Neither way is wrong. Here's what I want you to hear, though. It doesn't matter which way you work, as long as it works for you, not something you've been prescribed to do. I've watched outliners get stuck. I've watched discovery writers get stuck. Same wall, different starting point. Because what most writers are actually chasing isn't more frameworks or beat sheets, it's certainty. They want to feel sure before they start. They want to be sure the outline is right, sure the scene is working, sure they're not wasting their time. But that's backwards. You don't get certain and then write. Certainty and confidence in yourself comes as you begin to understand your story, as you make decisions, as you see what those decisions reveal and make the next decision. You don't need to know the whole story before you start. You need enough clarity to take the next step. And clarity comes from writing and asking questions about what's already on the page. So you know where it's all going. You know what to keep in, what to deepen, and what to cut. Sometimes the heart of the story is hiding in one line of dialogue or one image. You have all the answers. You just have to trust yourself more and stop turning to all these off-the-shelf beat sheets and craft books and story blueprints to give you the answers. There's nothing wrong with these. Just don't rely on them to the point where you're dependent on them. Learn to trust your own instincts. It's your story. Sometimes writers ask me, where should I start the story? Where should I start the scene? Should I cut this scene? Should I cut this line? But the bigger questions are, tell me about this character. What does she want here? Why does this matter so much to her in this moment? What happens if she doesn't get it? What's the main question driving this story? And the writer starts talking and realizes they know more about their story than they thought. Sometimes the answer is hiding in that one sentence in the middle of a scene. There it is. Sometimes it's even already on the page, buried in a description or a line of dialogue they didn't realize was important at the time. One thing I know from working with hundreds of first-time writers, you know far more about your story than you think you do. You just may not see how it all connects yet. The pieces are there. The story is telling you what it's trying to be. You just have to tune in and pay attention to what you've already written, no matter how messy and sprawling it is. That is the work. Okay, number 4. Clarity changes the way you write. The more clear you are about your story, the easier it is to write. Often I'll spend time with a writer asking questions about why they included something in the story that doesn't seem to be paying off yet. And I'll ask what they're thinking about it, why they put it there. Sometimes they'll say, you know what, I just thought it was a fun thing to write, but you're right, I should cut it. Or they'll tell me why they included a certain scene, and we'll find out that it does belong. It just needs to be made more clear. And suddenly they're off. They're thinking about what this means for another scene, what the character would do differently, why something they wrote 50 pages ago suddenly matters. I'm not giving them the answers. I'm helping them find the answers by asking questions. They're making the connections themselves. And you can feel the whole energy shift. A few minutes ago, they didn't know what to do. Now they're thinking about possibilities. They're making decisions. They want to get back into the story. They want to get back into the draft. That's what clarity does. It doesn't mean you suddenly have the whole book figured out. It gives you something to work from. The effect is cumulative. Once you can see what you're building, you can start making intentional decisions about where the story goes next. So, here's what I know from working with hundreds of writers across every genre. Having a powerful idea and knowing how to shape it are two different things. Struggling doesn't mean you can't write. And more story templates or beat sheets or outlines don't necessarily give you more clarity. In fact, it just brings more noise. You know more about your story than you think you do. And once you can see your story more clearly, the way you write changes. That's why I do this work. I never tell writers what should happen in their stories or what to do line by line. I don't want to give them more rules. I want them to write the story they're burning to write. And I don't think there's one correct way to write a novel or memoir. There just isn't. I want writers to be able to see their own stories and make their own choices because I've watched what happens when they do. They see a connection they couldn't see before. They have story clarity. They understand why something hasn't been working the way they wanted it to, the way they intended it to. And little by little, this thing that felt so overwhelming starts to make sense. It's doable. That's what I want for the writers I work with. I want you to understand your story well enough that you can look at your own pages and begin to see what's there, what the story needs, and what decision you need to make next. Not because somebody handed you the answer in a template or a beat sheet, because you understand the story you're trying to tell. Writing is hard. Writing a story worth reading is hard. It requires you to challenge yourself in ways you never expected. To achieve something you've never achieved before, writing a book, you have to become someone you've never been. You can't write the same, think the same, be the same, and expect a new, improved, and publishable book. That's just not how it works. That's why so many writers give up. If it was easy, everyone would be finishing and publishing. So expect it to be challenging because that's what makes it all worth it. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.